their stated goals and objectives. So Massachusetts passed these amazing acts that set itself up to be a state that was really going to try to meet some climate goals by investment in renewable energies. But it's one thing to sort of pass acts, it's another thing to actually follow through. And so you kind of need alliances, you need advocates who are going to kind of hold the state, their feet to the fire, so to speak, to keep them going. And so I think we're going to learn a lot about the role of an NGO in this particular one, her NGO, Green Energy Consumer Alliance, in the way that we can all help make improvements and keep governments honest. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome back.
Is this on? Yes, it is. Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here today. I am, in fact, Eugenia Gibbons, the Policy Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my organization and the work that we do and how I ended up there. And then I'm going to go into sort of where Massachusetts is in its pursuit of clean energy and climate goals, and how close we are to reaching those goals, and what the role of all of you and the public is in making sure that we don't fall short and don't miss the mark. So Green Energy Consumers Alliance is a consumer and environmental advocacy organization. We've been around since 1982. I've been there now for 5 years, about 5 years. Our mission is to harness the collective power of energy users to accelerate a transition to a low-carbon economy. What that basically means is we work really hard to make green energy choices easy and as seamless as possible for everyday folks, for businesses, for communities, for students, because we really believe that, first of all, green energy choices should be accessible to everybody. And if you're able to do it, then you're also able to become a really effective advocate for the change that we need to see, at the state level and nationally and internationally. And so you can speak from personal experience about why you've made these decisions and why they've worked for you, and you can compel decision makers to move a little faster. Some of the ways in which we work to make green energy choices really easy are from the cars that folks drive. We run we got started as a provider for a discount heating oil service in 1982, so that was really designed to try to make it easier for folks to be more efficient with their energy consumption and also purchase it at a discount. And over time we've evolved. We offer something called our Green Powered program, which is basically a voluntary program. You sign up, and as a member, you are paying to make your electricity supply 100% renewable. And we use the amount that you pay to do that to support local projects that are in region, many in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island, where we also operate. So I just love this slide because it just demonstrates what a significant impact individuals can have on moving the needle on clean energy in the region. And these are all the projects that are supported by our members. We have about 20,000 members in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. These are the locations where all of our projects are. So one of the things that we take great pride in is the education and outreach that we do to try to help folks understand why green energy matters and why renewable projects matter. And so we like to be able to take folks to the projects. If you build it, they will come. And if you can touch a project and you can see it up close, you can know that, hey, that actually is a real thing. And so we run tours, which I encourage folks to keep track of our summer schedule. When we do these tours, we bring folks to many of these projects so they can see community scale projects up close and personal. My personal favorite one is the wind turbine in Lynn. It's at the water treatment facility there. And the reason it's my favorite is because my daughter, when she was 3 years old, she's now 6, she spent all summer practicing writing her name. She could not wait until the tour of the Lynn turbine because she wanted to write her name on the inside of it when we visited it. So whenever we go to the Lynn turbine, we like to go inside and she can see her name in there. And a little, I think it's a smiley face. It's a 3-year-old's artwork, but it's next to her name. And then again, some of the ways that we help facilitate green energy choices You can green up your home's electricity. You can drive green with us. You can participate in our Shave the Peak alert program. It's just a mobile app or mobile notification that you get that tells you when we're going to have a high energy use or peak event, and then it'll give you recommendations for steps you can take to reduce your energy consumption during that time. And then the advocacy work that we do at the State House. So that's really where I fit in. As a policy director, I engage with all of our programs, but really my main job is to work to advance the policies and programs that we need to see at the state level to get closer to our clean energy and climate goals. So I have a bunch of slides. Please feel free, if you have questions as they come up, ask them. I don't want to be talking at you all for too long, so we can make this as interactive and conversational as you want. But why does Green Energy Consumers Alliance focus on climate action? Well, the impacts of climate change, as you all know, are increasingly being felt closer to home. Some of the images that we have here, that was me last March when we had that crazy high tide down by Aquarium and it flooded. There were sandbags down there. My umbrella broke. The picture of the folks in the boat, that was a rescue in Quincy. You can see the tweet from the Quincy police about emergency rescue and emergency going on. There severe droughts are happening, or were happening, actually still in place in some places. And I don't have the ability to play this, but I'm sure, how many of you saw the dumpster floating down Seaport District roads last year? No? Oh, well, I'll have to send the link. If this were playing, you'd see a dumpster floating down. Supports the Innovation District, which one of my colleagues likes to call the Inundation District, because it is so prone to flooding, and future is very grim in that area if we don't act on climate. Obviously, we'll type it. There's inaction and dysfunction at the federal level, so this just perfectly encapsulates the disconnect between our leadership, federal leadership, that thinks that climate change is a hoax, and their own report that was issued that said, you know, climate change is real and it's going to have terrible effects, catastrophic effects on the U.S. if we don't act. So in a context where there's federal dysfunction and inaction and lack of leadership, the onus really falls on states to lead by example and to take the steps required to demonstrate what is capable and what we need to do. And so this is like the perfect week for this discussion because there's been so much activity going on. I'm sure many of you probably saw yesterday Governor Baker was testifying before Congress on the way that all the things that Massachusetts is doing to advance clean energy and climate action. He basically called for federal action. It's very bad when you have this sort of patchwork of policies and patchwork of solutions state by state, everybody approaching it differently. It would be much easier if we could just have a comprehensive national approach to how to deal with this. And so one of the things he was calling for was federal action on climate, and also emphasizing and highlighting the role that governors in particular across the country are taking in really moving the needle forward. And he defended offshore wind. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's why we focus on climate change, because basically, I mentioned I have a daughter. In 10 years, she will be 18, or the world will be ending, one way or the other, or both. So we need to move and to act to make sure that there's a future here for everybody. So in Massachusetts, in 2008, there was a suite of clean energy and climate policies that were passed. It was a banner year for policy and for laws in Massachusetts. Under the Patrick administration, the Green Jobs Act was passed, the Green Communities Act, and the Global Warming Solutions Act. As an aside, I actually wrote my thesis on the Green Jobs Act and did some of my early intern work on the development of the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for the GWSA. And look at this, 10 years later, I'm still doing that same work. So anyway, so the Green Jobs Act, I'm going to focus mostly on the GWSA, but it's worth noting that the Green Jobs Act created, one of the things it did was create the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. The purpose of that act was to facilitate investment in renewable energy solutions to really drive development of a clean energy and climate hub, an economic engine here in Massachusetts and in the region. And there's also, so there's emphasis and focus placed on technology development as well as workforce development. For any students who are interested in interning in the clean energy space, the Clean Energy Center runs an internship program. We actually get almost all of our interns from the Clean Energy program. It's a paid internship. They pay for interns. Take advantage of it. The Green Communities Act enabled the Green Communities program. That is a way for municipalities to engage in state coordinated activity to help reduce their energy use. So there are some commitments tied to the Green Communities program. There are now, I think, 250 communities in Massachusetts of the 351 participate in the Green Communities program. And basically, you have 5 years to try to reduce your your energy footprint, I think by 20%, and there are resources put towards helping you do that. From a renewable energy space or point of view and an energy efficiency point of view, the GCA was really important for 2 reasons in terms of clean energy and climate. It set standards for renewable electricity supply. So in Massachusetts, we have something called a renewable portfolio standard. It's basically a minimum percentage of renewable supply that utilities, investor-owned utilities and competitive suppliers are required to provide from year to year. And prior to 2008, we had an RPS in place. What the GCA did was it made a distinction in what kinds of resources could be used to meet that requirement. So you got something called Class 1, which were anything new and put into operation from 1998 or later. Wind, solar, anaerobic digestion, all of those projects that were on that first slide that I showed you that our members support. The other class is called Class 2. Those are anything that were in operation before 97, and it's mostly hydro, small-scale hydro, low-impact hydro. And the GCA, in modifying the RPS, also said, all right, Massachusetts, you have this RPS. We're going to make it increase incrementally 1% per year forever. And that was also significant. It meant that each year the utilities had to procure more and more of those new resources, those new renewables, which makes the RPS an essential driver for clean energy and renewable energy projects in the region. The other thing that GCA did was establish requirements for energy efficiency and demand management. So there's a provision in the Act that says essentially utilities are required to procure energy efficiency, whatever, energy demand management resources that are cost effective or less expensive than new supply. In other words, you can't go out there and buy a whole bunch of expensive fossil fuel generation or gas needed to heat unless you've demonstrated that you've exhausted our cheapest resource first, which is energy efficiency. If it costs a customer, if it costs you and me less to do efficiency than it does for us to buy more supply, then the utilities, according to the GCA, are supposed to do that. And every 3 years, they develop what's called the State Energy Efficiency Plan, or the 3-year Energy Efficiency Investment Plan, which basically outlines how they're going to be investing ratepayer dollars to ensure that they're delivering energy efficiency to you and to me and to businesses across the Commonwealth. Massachusetts has been ranked #1 in their energy efficiency program, in part because of this requirement in these laws for, I think this is just the 8th year in a row. Okay, that's GCA. GCA in a nutshell says we need to do everything we can with renewable electricity and with energy efficiency because we want to grow the clean energy sector, and we recognize there's an economic opportunity tied to investing in renewables and investing in efficiency. The other thing worth noting about efficiency is Massachusetts is at the end of the energy pipeline, right? We don't have any fossil fuel resources that are indigenous to the state or to the region. We don't we don't have coal, we don't have gas. And so we do have lots of wind, we have lots of solar. So that's another reason why energy efficiency is emphasized. So that's what GCA did. GWSA said, okay, Massachusetts, you need to do something about climate change. We know it's coming. The science is telling us it's going to be pretty bad. This is 2007. Remember that this conversation is happening. So what we're going to do as a state is set a requirement that Massachusetts reduce its greenhouse gas emissions 25% below 1990 levels by 2020 and 80% by 2050. That at the time is what science indicated was necessary to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. This was really bold at the time that it passed. It was the most ambitious target. The 2020 target was the most ambitious target outside of California that was put into place. This act set these as binding targets, which meant Massachusetts has a statutory obligation to meet them. They're not just aspirational goals that we can, hope to reach one day. We have to reach them, and that's important because of what's happened in recent years, and I'll explain that. The GWSA also required that a clean energy and climate plan for 2020 be developed. That happened in 2010. When the first draft was released, it was really focused on achieving the 25% below 1990 as cost effectively and affordably as possible. So there's a lot of emphasis placed on electricity generation and energy efficiency, but it has been updated. It gets updated every 5 years, and actually we have a 10-year update coming up. And then there's also an implementation advisory committee, which is a body appointed by the governor of various stakeholders who provide input into the development of these plans. So we have these laws, and we have a policy framework to reach the mandates in the laws. So how are we doing? Well, first of all, Massachusetts emissions by sector, it's important to look at that because we've done a really excellent job reducing emissions in our electricity supply or generation sector. Part of it's because of the requirements of the GCA, right? There's that RPS requirement. There's the energy efficiency component. So we're reducing demand, or demand is remaining flat even though we're growing as our economy is growing. RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Initiative, which is a regional cap and trade program on emissions, on generation, fossil generation, helped to really helped to ratchet down emissions in the generation sector, mostly because it made it uneconomic to operate coal plants and oil plants anymore. So because of all of these things, in the last 10 years, we've seen emissions really come down in the electric sector. And you can see right here, today, electricity, the emissions from the electric sector are only about 1/5 of our overall energy or emissions profile. Oh yeah, it's also worth noting, more than 2/3 of our electricity comes from gas, so that's really problematic. We can't keep increasing our reliance on gas. We need to get off of it. That means that there are fewer and fewer opportunities to squeeze emissions out of the electricity supply sector. Places where the emissions are growing, that big purple chunk, that big purple wedge, that's the transportation sector. So emissions in transportation have actually increased in the last 10 years, and that's a huge problem because we have to figure out we should be going down, not up. And then these are some in other sectors. Sure, yeah, thanks.
Have the transportation emissions increased, or has their percentage of the pie increased?
Excellent. They have increased.
Okay.
And as they've increased, their percentage of the pie has also increased.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it was just a factor from electricity becoming more or less carbon dense.
No, that's an excellent question. Yeah, no, it's actually because the emissions themselves are going up because people are driving more, but also as electricity gets smaller, their proportion of the overall profile goes up. Sure.
Yeah, so the transportation sector, does that include like public transportation and your own private transportation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So these two graphs just show you where the green dots are where we're supposed to be in 2020. The first graph is business as usual. You can see that if we had continued along the trajectory we were on before, we would have been way above where we're supposed to be in 2020. But because of investments made in renewables and efficiency and other things, we're inching close to 2020. The kicker about that target is we won't actually know until 2023 if we hit 2020. Could you imagine if you didn't know until 3 years after you finished school that, like, if you'd actually graduated? It would make planning your life really hard. So, so there's about a 3-year data lag. And if you ask the administration, they'll tell you that we are on track to reach our 2020 target. Those of us in the advocacy community are a little less optimistic and feel like, particularly because of transportation, we're actually not going to hit the 2020 target. And even if we're on track to hit it, we should be going above and beyond because we still have to hit 2050 and 2030 and 2040 before that. So I mentioned, one last thing to mention. So when the first 2020 plan came out, the plan for reaching the emission reductions, a fifth of the emission reductions accounted for in that plan were supposed to come from imported hydroelectricity from Canada. We have not yet built those transmission lines to move the hydro down from Canada, and it is 2019. So raise your hand if you think by 2020 we will have met that goal. Okay. That just speaks to one of the challenges and the disconnects between developing policy solutions and actually implementing them. We're now 10 years removed from when that first plan was, or the law was passed, and a major component of compliance is tied up in very contentious conversations and negotiations that fall outside of Massachusetts. So how has momentum been maintained in the last 10 years by advocacy and activism? Well, the advocacy community and activists were really instrumental in getting those laws passed in 2008. We probably would not have a robust GWSA or even Green Communities Act had advocates not been at the table saying this is really important and we need to be prioritizing things like local renewable resources, community benefits, the interests of low-income communities and communities of color. These things all need to be part of the conversation. And I hear stories, I was not there at the time that the laws were being developed, but all the stories I hear are that the very first draft of the Green Communities Act was not even worth the paper it had been printed on. It was not a great bill, but it was through collaboration and coordination and really deep dialogue and long conversations that we got a really robust GCA, and the same thing is true for the GWSA. So in most recent years, though, I mentioned, Massachusetts is #1 in energy efficiency from year to year. For a long time, we were #1 in green building design. We have a really aggressive RPS. All of these things that Massachusetts had in place made it a leader, which is a position that Massachusetts has really always played on a number of different issues. And so it was kind of easy for the administrations that have been in charge in the last few years, both under Baker and Patrick, to say, we'll get there. We have all the tools in place. We have all the policy tools in place to meet our goals. Don't worry. And besides, I remember being in meetings before the administration changed and folks saying, even if we don't have the policies, we have the regulatory authority to be able to regulate our way to compliance. Don't worry. We'll get there. I mentioned I've been doing this for 10 years. We are not there yet. So in about 2014, advocates got together and said, listen, we know we don't have all the data. So we need more action. We need a couple of things. One, we need the state to be more transparent about how it's pursuing its goals and to report regularly on that progress. And the result of those conversations was the development of a dashboard that's maintained by Massachusetts. That's where all those graphs were pulled from, that tells the story of where Massachusetts is in terms of its compliance with the Global Warming Solutions Act. So that is updated regularly. The activity of the implementation advisory committee is posted there. So it's a transparent, it's a resource that promotes and encourages transparency and engagement, and also makes really cool graphs when you need to pull them to put them into slides. So there's that thing. There's that piece. The other thing is a number of advocates, including my organization and Conservation Law Foundation, kept pointing to this piece of the Global Warming Solutions Act that said Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection was supposed to create new regulations that would go into effect in 2013, 2014 to ensure that we didn't miss the 2020 target. And so, remember, we have the regulatory authority to do everything we need to do to get to 2020, right? So there's a provision in law that said, you have the regulatory authority to do everything. Make new regulations to ensure that you get there. Identify sources or category of sources for emissions and put a cap on it and figure out a way to ratchet them down. So nobody did that under Patrick. Patrick's DEP didn't do it, and Baker's DEP didn't do it. And so ultimately we had to sue the state. And together with Conservation Law Foundation and a group of students, high school students, we were successful. The state's highest court actually ruled in our favor, in the favor of the environment, saying the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection had failed to do what it was supposed to do to make sure that emissions were being reduced by 2020. So this happened, those regs were supposed to go into effect in 2013 or 2014. So this lawsuit happened in 2015, 2016. The ruling came out in late 2016. It took a year to develop them, and then they were put into place on January 1st, 2018, about 5 years later than they were supposed to be in place. And they were supposed to sunset in 2020. So we basically had 2 years to try to get everything we could out of those regulations. There was a subsequent ruling by the SJC in this past fall that said the intention is really to go beyond 2020. So the regs need to make sure that we're moving forward and maintaining momentum towards reaching those climate goals. The other thing that happened is, how many of you are from Massachusetts? How many of you are from Western Massachusetts? Okay, well, there was a very contentious project proposed in Western Mass in 2014. It was called the Kinder Morgan Pipeline. It was a massive gas distribution pipeline, interstate pipeline. And it would have moved tons of gas. Were any of you here in 2013, 2014 for the first polar vortex, when gas prices spiked really significantly? So in that winter, it was freezing cold, and all of a sudden gas prices skyrocketed, and the reason given by the utilities was supply constraints. We don't have enough gas to meet heating demand and electricity, and the solution proposed was a pipeline, a massive pipeline. Not energy efficiency, which remember is supposed to be cheaper than new supply, not conservation, but a big, huge pipeline. The market was not willing to bear the cost or the risk associated with that pipeline, so the utilities went to the Department of Public Utilities and said, could we make electric ratepayers pay for it? And the DPU said, yeah, sure, sure, do it, go for it. So they were sued for a number of reasons, mostly because that violated, what the Supreme Judicial Court ruled was that it violated restructuring, and that's a good project if anyone's interested in it. Go back and research it. But basically, the state's highest court, the same year that they ruled for the GWSA lawsuit, ruled in favor of consumers and said, slow down, utilities. You cannot make electric customers pay for your gas distribution pipeline. Find another way to do it. So that was a huge win. And that came because there was a mobilization effort that started in 2012 or 2013 in Western Mass and sort of grew statewide to increase awareness and understanding of how terrible this project was and what the real costs would be borne both environmentally and by consumers and by communities who were going to have to host or lose parts of their communities to run this pipeline. And it culminated in this huge victory at the state's highest court. So that basically put the kibosh on that pipeline and made it unfinanceable. And that was good, because in this fight for climate, ironically, the biggest boon to our advocacy work is time. If we can just run the clock out on some of these really huge potentially catastrophic projects, while we continue to make the case for solutions like more renewables and more efficiency and other things that are less carbon intensive, then we will win, ultimately. And so that's what happened. And then there's been, in recent years, I just have this slide of mothers out front. There's a call to action today, actually, ways to engage. We are outgunned and outmanned. When I say we, the advocacy community is really outgunned and outmanned when it comes to the utilities and resources that we can throw behind major campaigns. So it does come down to collaboration with each other, working in coalitions, partnering with each other on major efforts like the lawsuit, and then leveraging social media like it's nobody's business, because no legislator likes to look bad. So Twitter storms are a tactic that are often employed, lobby days and rallies at the state house, and just showing up and being present. And I think one of the biggest things that I've seen change in the last 10 years is the level of engagement of the average citizen. It's no longer, because energy policy is like inherently wonky, and so you get a lot of folks who kind of walk in and can talk about the technical side of energy. But what I've seen change in recent years is there are more and more people who are ready to talk about the personal impact that these decisions are having on their lives. And part of that is because some of these really big projects that were proposed would have had a direct impact on folks' livelihoods and on their communities. It's also because I think people are becoming more familiar with the concept of energy. It's no longer a matter of like, if I turn my light switch on, the lights should come on. People really are starting to understand where that electricity comes from, or where your heating fuel comes from, why it matters, and how we can come up with local solutions. So that is really significant. And then the great thing about this is that it's forced the energy so citizen engagement and action and activism has forced energy policy to remain in the forefront. So our legislative cycles are 2 years long. The last 2 legislative cycles have always begun with the legislature saying, we're not taking up another comprehensive energy bill. We do not have the appetite to do that. And in the last 2 sessions, we've seen 2 major pieces of legislation pass. So in 2016, Governor Baker signed the Comprehensive Energy Diversity Act, which basically greenlit the procurement of offshore wind. So it set requirements that a certain amount of our electricity come from offshore wind, that's separate from our renewable portfolio standard, required the utilities to enter into contracts to get those things here. Offshore wind, remember I mentioned it's one of our indigenous resources. We have a ton of potential to generate wind off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, and tapping into that will reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we'll have to import. It also means that Massachusetts can become a hub for an anchor for a growing offshore wind industry. Then last year, 2018, this session, we had a second really big energy bill pass. The most significant part of that was a change to our renewable portfolio standard, so an increase in the amount of renewable energy that's required each year. That was something that 5 years ago, folks were like, that's just politically untenable, don't even bother. And then 4 years ago, folks were like, what do you think about maybe like 0.5% more? And last year, people were like, we need 4% more per year. We won't settle for less than that. We had to settle for less than that. We ended up with we now have 2% per year increase instead of 1, but it was a win. And then my favorite thing of all is the Executive Order 569, which Governor Baker signed in 2016. So that came out of the lawsuit. Okay, So I'm going to tell you my version. I'll tell you their version, the administration's version. Is this being recorded? Okay. So a lot of our work comes down to helping other folks think that the really excellent thing they're about to do was their idea to begin with. That's advocacy in a nutshell. So we had to sue the state to get them to act on climate. The state lost that lawsuit. The advocates won. And then Governor Baker signed a really ambitious and aggressive executive order which detailed all of the ways that his administration was going to prioritize climate action. I don't care what it took to happen, it happened, so it's great. And what we've gotten out of that is him testifying before Congress about the important steps that Massachusetts is taking to combat climate change. We've gotten a number of comprehensive reports, including a comprehensive energy plan that looks at energy generation and consumption through 2030 and includes a clear, you could infer from that study that there's a clear path forward in terms of how we're going to meet those goals. The Future of Transportation report came out of a different executive order, but gets at this emissions from the transportation sector and how we're going to tackle that. There's an 80 by 2050 study that's going to be undertaken. We are about to see the 10-year update to the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. And then unrelated to state activity, but something that will certainly inform state activity, is the Carbon-Free Boston plan, report that was just released. All of these reports, if you read them, all draw the same conclusion, which is we've done an excellent job in cleaning up our electricity supply, but there are tremendous opportunities going forward, and we will not get to where we're supposed to be if we don't tackle emissions from transportation and heating, or the thermal sector. So did anybody see this report yesterday, this article in yesterday's Globe? It was really about the segregation that you see on the various bus lines and how little things have actually changed in the decades since Rosa Parks. But increasingly, folks are starting to turn to transportation as the next space where we have to figure out climate change. We have to act on climate change in the transportation sector. And so in recent weeks, there's been a lot of talk about something called the Transportation Climate Initiative, or TCI. It's basically RGGI for the transportation sector. It's a regional effort to try to figure out how to ratchet down emissions from the transportation sector by putting a value on the carbon emitted there and then reinvesting those dollars in solutions that are going to help bring down the emissions. There's lots of talk about vehicle electrification. It's a space that my organization is very actively involved in. And mobility choice, so how we get around. It shouldn't just be about electrifying vehicles. It should also be about smart growth development and thinking about walkability and bikeability and making sure that folks have access to these things. So transportation, the reason I put this up here is because equity and social justice, you cannot address environmental concerns and climate concerns without also trying to address equity and social justice. The two go hand in hand, and transportation, in my mind, is one space where that is really, really evident. So as we think about trying to come up with solutions that are accessible and equitable, bus electrification in particular is one that has a health benefit, it has an environmental benefit, it's about accessibility, and it's one place where I feel that communities that are often overlooked can really be in the, pardon the pun, the driver's seat in directing how these resources get invested and how they'll benefit their communities most. So transportation is one space where in the next 2 years, you're going to hear tons. If anybody here is thinking about what they want to do next, there will be lots of opportunities to intern and to work in the transportation space, I'm sure of it. And then the thermal sector. Is anyone here from the Merrimack Valley? Was anybody affected by the explosion? Yeah. So lots of folks who were affected by the explosion in was that September now? It's already, yeah, it's September. My family's from Rhode Island. My elderly parents actually live in Newport, and they just had a week-long outage, gas outage, because of a pressure drop in a pipeline. So these system failures in the gas distribution network are starting to really put into focus, sharp focus for everyone, the fact that our system is failing and we have to come up with another way to heat our homes and to keep folks warm without putting them at risk, exposing them to risk. So from a climate perspective, most folks are talking about beneficial electrification. You'll hear that a lot, both in reference to the thermal sector and transportation. But it's just, how do we heat our homes without bringing combustible fuels into them? Heat pumps is really what it comes down to. This is like the super awesome, super sexy sector, obviously, right? Building electrification, building codes and standards. I'm kidding. It's like very wonky and kind of boring, but it's the place where these really big decisions are going to be made. And our state efficiency programs. So I mentioned our nation-leading programs. That's arguably one vehicle for really aggressive change, but we have to figure out a way to leverage those programs and those resources and dollars to make sure that they're being invested in solutions that help us get off of fossil fuel rather than extend or prolong our dependence on them. And that's one of the things that we're actively involved in. And a place where, because those are consumer programs, it's a place where individual voices really matter. And then if you should absolutely become a member of Green Energy Consumers Alliance. You should at a minimum follow us on social media, subscribe to our blog posts. Our blog, we have a lot of posts that we try to be informative and helpful about some of these issues and sort of demystify clean energy and climate action. And then you can always reach us, and I'm happy to make my contact information available, because as I mentioned, we do have interns in the summer, and I'm always looking for someone to help me up at the State House and knock on doors and rabble-rouse when needed. So I'll open it up for questions.
I'm going to ask the first question, and if anybody else wants to follow. So this is earlier this semester, we also had someone talk about how important collaboration between different and nonprofits comes to when working with the state, and you've sort of echoed that. And so you mentioned the Conservation Law Foundation. I actually have no idea what their stance is on offshore wind, but I'm wondering if this is the offshore wind, how has it played out in terms of moving collaborations, people who are for it or against it, or is there some consolidation that offshore wind now is a good idea?
So I would say that offshore wind is actually a very unifying resource. I haven't really encountered any climate advocates who are opposed to it, mostly because it's here and it has the potential to bring real economic growth to Massachusetts and to the region. And a resource that is a little more contentious and one where there's not always alignment on its value is the hydro imports. That's a resource that, for example, my organization believes that we do need some hydro in order to get off of gas and to get off of these emitting resources. Others take a harder line against hydro, and so one of the reasons why one of the challenges we're encountering right now is with the siting of the transmission lines needed to move the hydro from Canada into Massachusetts. Northern Pass was a very contentious project that would have cut through the White Mountains in New Hampshire. That one went down. There have been two subsequent proposals that are being considered, and there's not total alignment on the siting of those projects, of those lines. And so that's one reason why we're in this predicament where we have a big slug of our GHG emission reductions are supposed to come from this imported resource that the lines needed to move it haven't even been sited, or if they've been sited, they haven't been permitted and have not been built yet. But offshore wind, not so much. Folks love wind. And I should mention one other thing. So there's our largest coal-fired power plant closed a few years ago. That was down in Brayton Point in Somerset, Massachusetts. Somerset was home to 2 power plants. Imagine the percentage of the tax base that came from those 2 power plants and how devastating it was for that community when they closed. The offshore wind presents an opportunity to revive industry in that part of the state, and particularly in that community where the Brayton Point power plant can be repurposed if the transmission lines run, the wind is delivered through Brayton.
So yeah, following up on the effect on communities when you're switching energy sources, I think one of the challenges we might face when trying to form a unified national level, federal level laws is that we have to take into account those communities that are going to be more affected by changing, like, obviously coal mining in Virginia or something like that. So how would you account for that?
How would I account for addressing the different needs and concerns of each state?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that those needs need to be factored into any equation, and there are a lot of coal mining communities that are very involved in the discussion about transitioning to renewables, to onshore wind in particular, for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the health impacts associated with mining and extraction overall. I think it's a conversation that has to happen and coordination that's needed. I believe that Governor Baker even indicated that in his remarks yesterday that basically there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We're not going to be able to just take what works in Massachusetts and make it work down in Virginia or West Virginia, but we can come together and figure out what's the right balance and how do we work together. So maybe it's something like, take transportation, for example, where all the states agree we have to come up with a way to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. And we can agree that one mechanism for doing that is a cap and invest program. Now let's sit down and figure out the details of what that looks like and how it may or may not differ from state to state.
So on the topic of the state being bound by legislation to meet its goals, such as reducing emissions by 25% by 2020, what does that mean? So other than allowing us to sue the state for not meeting its goals, does it place some sort of punishment on the government or on the lawmakers for not meeting it? Is there any incentive to actually do what they are supposed to do?
That's such a good question. It's one I ask myself all the time. Well, like I said, we won't know until 2022 or 23 if we've hit 2020. So at that point, another lawsuit would be an option. The lawsuit wouldn't be like, hey, you missed the emissions target, now what? It would probably have to be something more specific, like the regulation lawsuit. Like, there's an actual mechanism that you should have put in place to make this happen. You didn't do it, now you have to. I think there is, because Massachusetts has made such gains in recent years in terms of meeting its obligations, the reason for us, perhaps one of the largest motivating factors, is that we're pulling other states along with us. And so once we're all moving in the same direction, it's really hard to go back to where we were. And so there's an economic argument and motivation there, because we have an industry that's thriving and growing as a result of the technologies employed to try to meet these targets. We have folks who are employed in the energy efficiency space. An excellent example, I think that's probably the biggest one. I don't know what the legal I really don't know what it is. You can't send them to timeout. You can't put grounds the government. I don't know. I don't know other than a lawsuit. But I will say that there's definitely an economic argument to be made for continuing to move forward along this trajectory. So this argument has come up in solar in particular, where we have net metering caps in place in Massachusetts across the utility service territories. When those net metering caps are hit, it puts a hold on new solar projects that can be built. And we had an issue, and we've had an issue that has continued in recent years, where the caps are being hit much faster than they're expected to be hit. And so for our solar industry, where you're employing solar installers, contractors, electricians, folks who are depending on these incentives and these programs to keep solar going, when those caps are hit and the market is basically just put on hold, folks lose jobs. That's a very compelling argument when you go into a legislator and you have a bunch of constituents saying, I am not working right now because you have these artificial caps imposed on our sector. We have to come up with a solution that's better than this. And so that's, the economics of it are what drive it.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation, and energy's been of interest to me since back in the 70s with the nuclear power plant in Seabrook. And I think with the alternative energies, the big question keeps being, well, they can't do it all. Okay, we understand we need to move on from the fossil fuels, and I'm really not pro-nuclear, but it does seem like in terms of the carbon, got lots of other problems that might, I'm just interested in where your Green Energy Consumer Alliance, what you do with nuclear, yeah.
So, the first answer is nuclear. I do not believe that we will see a nuclear plant sited in New England in my lifetime, but I don't know. I mean, I could be proven wrong 50 years from now, but I don't think that that's going to happen. Our position would be focusing on storage in particular. So efficiency, so reducing consumption is one piece of the puzzle. Getting more green energy online is another one, and then storage. Really investing in storage as a distributed energy resource, utility scale storage, all of it to try to really leverage those renewable intermittent resources so that we have them at our disposal during periods of peak demand. Folks love to say the sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing. That's how you get around that, through storage. And Massachusetts has done some analysis in recent years to look at its storage potential. It is pretty significant. It's a priority of this administration. It's another opportunity for economic growth and development and investment. And so I think we'll see more and more focus placed on how to pair storage and renewables, which I think will happen a lot sooner than we'll see another then we'll see the appetite for nuclear power to come online. There's, I'm sure, from Seabrook, there's staunch opposition across the state to nuclear.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I wanted to ask if you had advice for students, classes you wish you had taken, or directions that you tell your interns, things you'd recommend that they consider in their schooling or going forward.
Sure. Everything I learned in my career, I did not learn in school. No. No, what I would say is Massachusetts has an embarrassment of riches in terms of clean energy opportunities, environmental expertise. There's so many organizations in this space that are doing amazing things. It's one reason why there's so much opportunity to collaborate across organizations and with each other. So I would say, if you find something through your courses that you're interested in and you want to go a little deeper, reach out to any of the organizations that are out there. Maybe do an internship. Most of us, as I mentioned, try to offer paid internships. Take advantage of things like the Mass Clean Energy Center. And then I would I can't think of any courses that I wish I would have taken, but I did love UEP and had some fantastic professors who helped to kind of put me on this path. So if anyone's considering a grad program, that's one I recommend, highly recommend. Yeah.
I just want to take this opportunity because your talk about storage there at the end just reminds me of a talk that's coming up, and I'm going to read it. Ryan Kotofsky is going to be talking about the transportation revolution, electric vehicles and the changing nature of transportation. So it's a perfect complement to today's talk. And a conversation that I had with him was, what if we took all our school buses and made them batteries in the summer?
Yeah.
So he's going to have lots of really interesting ideas to present about how we can sort of work on that big piece of the pie. So, but one last question? Or, okay.
If people know about Greentown Labs here, there is a networking event tonight from 5:30 to 8:30 at Greentown Labs near Union Square, Somerville. Oh, Greentown Labs is the country's largest incubator space for green energy startups. Tonight, 5:30 to 8:30. If you go to Eventbrite, you can sign up for it.
So let's take this opportunity to thank Eugenia one more time.